the language. So the costs are going to be calculated with all of these, the migration history, the political barriers, the distance, and the language, all of this incorporated, giving you sort of an idea how costly it is to move from one country to another. And then if I return to that decision, so we have wages, we have costs, but wages are also not automatic, right? You're not guaranteed a job, for example. That depends on the situation in the country. It depends on your skills. So we program some sort of a probability, and we use unemployment rates to tell us how likely it is that you can get a job, right? So we can account for sort of likelihood and probabilities of being successful at finding a job. So adding this kind of probability to it. And we allow this to vary by your kind of skill level, by your earnings level. Now, there's going to be a lot of countries for which it would make sense for you to move. So we try to pick sort of the one best decision. So the biggest gains, but again, accounting for the history of the migration and these things, picking one country that the person potentially would choose to go. Okay, so it produces these kind of graphic estimates of world flows. So this is giving you a snapshot of where immigrants would go. So these are the destinations, right? Again, very large weight is on the income. That's kind of the big part of the decision. So your highest earning countries are going to be the ones that are going to be the hottest destinations, right, for world migrants. If we look at where people leave from, this is going to be the opposite end of the spectrum. Countries that have less incomes and have the reason, right, have a reason to leave, or have really kind of maybe not great rights. And this is a good example of when I said it's trying to make one model fit all countries. This is also telling us that there would be a lot of people leaving from Canada, for example. Now, that's not really the case. We don't have Canadians flooding out and, leaving for the US. But when you think about what the model's estimating, it still thinks that US, for example, has higher wages, it has similar rights, it's close, right? So it's thinking that Canadians, and there are a decent number of Canadians in the US, right? Even from the migration history. So it's predicting actually decent flows from Canada. So it might be overestimating a little bit there. And this is why it's important to kind of think about this. Okay, what matters more for my country, right? What would I put more weight on as I'm kind of playing with the model? Okay, we also added this sort of two-country comparison. The model will produce the statistics for every combination of countries, right? But if you want to look at a specific comparison, we thought it would be easier just to have kind of a visual method, so students or you can put two countries in there and figure out, okay, how do I want to look at this? So the model would be estimating, right, that nobody's going to Mexico, and about 28,000 people are going to the US. And this is also not correct. We have US people who are retiring in Mexico, moving back, right? But when you're looking at this from a country level, just looking at the income differentials, it's going to miss some of these smaller flows, for example. So it's a rough estimate that we're trying to capture here. Okay, so once we actually built the model, we were trying to see, okay, do our prediction fit to what the UN statistics are actually reporting, right? So if we estimate our baseline model that I showed you, so those are the orange bars, the blue bars are the true World Bank estimates. And then we also estimated another version of the model where we changed the weights. I think we put more weight on the political barriers, for example, instead of the distance. So you can see that the estimates are going to change a little bit. But we feel like, again, not perfect, but at least direction-wise, in terms of the world flows, the model seems to track pretty well. So I want to now show you what it can do. So maybe I'll actually put this, I can put this in the chat, I think. Let me see. I can... that might be easier than people copying this. Okay, I can put the link to the to the page in there. So if once you get to that site, again, people who can code can use GitHub directly. I don't know how to do that, so I would not be able to do so. So what we did is we built these kind of user-friendly tools for people to use. So if you go onto the site, at the bottom, this is a screenshot that I put on. There's two links. One is to the Google Colab guide that's in English. One is in Spanish. So don't hold me to it, but my students try to do their best of translating the guide, kind of the user guide, to Spanish, and also the code itself. So once it actually opens a code, it's available in Spanish as well. So I'll try to give you an idea. So they should be exactly the same, with the same sort of screenshots and directions of how to use them. But your first step would literally be this link where it says go to the Google Colab file. What it's going to do, it's actually going to open a copy of the code that you can work with, and it's going to sign into your Google Drive, and it's going to save the kind of workbook that you'll be editing directly in there. So if you go in there, you can click on the Google Colab, either in the Spanish or the English version, and it will open the code for you. Now, one thing I will say on the left-hand side here, this little kind of 3 lines with the tabs, when the code opens, it just looks like code. But if you click on this button on the left, it actually will open like the menu, so that it's easier to navigate through the code. But I'll show you as well in a little bit. So that's what I meant right here, the table of contents, so that you can see where you are in the code, because honestly, the front part of the code is just the code running the basic estimates and inputting all the data, which is not important. The only thing that we want to worry about is this piece where you're actually editing the values of the code. So let me show you what I mean. So once you open these, you can now basically play with changing the situation around the world, right? If you want to model different situation, that unemployment is changing in certain countries, the political rights or freedoms are changing, you can model changes in these, immigration policy and visa, right? You can rank the countries as more welcoming or less welcoming now. You can model conflicts. Those could, right? They can alter populations, they can alter freedoms, they can alter unemployment, right? Economic opportunities. All of these things are things that you can now start changing. So the very first time you open the code and you're going to execute and have it run, basically, it's going to save estimates for just the baseline that's in there. So it has 1 year or the closest year kind of values for countries around the world. And it is matching it to that UN database, kind of predicting the actual flows that were happening in that year, right? So when you just execute and run the code the very first time, it's going to produce estimates of global migration flows without any changes, just kind of based on that input set of values. So we're taking, incomes per capita around the world, unemployment rates, the freedom indices, the ranking of the passports. So it gives you baseline statistics. But now if you want to change things in this, right here in this menu, right, you would click on editing the variables, and it's going to take you to this piece of code that I'm showing you here. And it's showing you there's a line to change the freedom index, line to change a passport index, line to change the unemployment population. And this is the migration flows. So if you want to change something, you would go into this piece of the segment. Now, the fact that there's this pound sign in front of all of these and they look blue is actually telling you that right now the code is skipping these lines. So the pound is basically say, ignore my line, don't pay attention to me. So if you want to change it, so let's say we would say, okay, what do we think is going to happen to world flows if unemployment in Mexico goes up? Right? So I find first, I have to figure out what is the unemployment in Mexico in the data that's currently in the model, right? So in the GitHub page, that's the home for kind of the landing page in there, there is a data folder. and I'll show you once I get done with the slides, it's actually going to save it in your Google Drive as well. And there's all these Excel or CVS files that have the original values. So if you open this, so this one's from the CIA, we have unemployment values. So I opened the folder, and I found that for Mexico, the value was 4.4. So that is what's assuming the baseline values. It's assuming Mexican unemployment was 4.4%. So if I want to make it go up, let's say I want it to go up to 7.3%. So what I'm going to do is remove the pound sign in front of that unemployment line. And now I'm going to tell the program, okay, when you make your estimates now for the world flows, I want you to change the value for Mexico. So you actually have to tell it which country. And there's again, one of the Excel files that's in the folder is all the country abbreviations. So you find what country abbreviation is for Mexico. We found that the original was 4.4, and we want to now change it to 7.3. So you would uncomment, you would take the pound sign and now change, I want this to do Mexico being equal to 7.3 instead. Now the code saves the file. So the very last piece in the code creates these output files, the estimates. So once you change your Mexico to 7.3, you would go to this little block of code and you would rename the files. So instead of baseline, now I change the names to UN7. That unemployment rate I changed to 7%. So because if you don't change the file names, it's just going to keep writing over new information over the original files. Does that make sense? So every time I change something in my code, I give it a new name so that I can then compare the starting values to the new values. So I changed my unemployment, Mexico 7.3. I gave new names to my output files. And if I open them, I now have my original. So you can, you can see here it was a baseline, and this is the one that I renamed UN7. And if I look at the numbers, the original was predicting 275, 501.5 persons, I guess, leaving Mexico. And now with the higher unemployment, I'm getting 290,000, right? So I'm getting about 15,000 more people leaving Mexico when unemployment went up to 7.3%. Does that make sense? So this is how you would make or students, right, would make the comparisons to see, okay, how big of an effect do we think this is going to have on outflows from Mexico? So if I want to, for example, I mentioned, right, that this is one of the flexibilities of the model as well, change how big of an importance these parameters have. So I told you the baseline value is that the biggest weight is on the migration history, and then you have a little bit more on geographic distance and less on the other factors. So we have these weights, right? They're the alphas. We also have weights that we put either on the kind of Mexicans who left or Mexicans who are in the origin, and the weight between the passport and the freedom indices. So they're always kind of, right, giving how much of an importance do I give to each. The one thing that you have to remember is that they have to add up to 1, right? They have to have 100% weight together, but you can change the values based on what you think is important. So in our example, if I want to increase the importance of political barriers, and say, I don't care about the migration history as much, instead of these kind of baseline values that are in there, I could go ahead and again, remove the little pound sign, and I'm changing alpha 2 instead of being 0.5. So alpha 2 is right here. That was the migration history, right? I'm going to now just make it 0.2. And I'm going to take alpha 4, which was my political barriers. And instead of having it just be a 10% weight, I'm giving it a 40% weight, right? So I would take away the pound signs, change the numbers. I just have to make sure they add up to 1. And I could now run the new estimates again, right? If I want to change policy in Canada and say they're more welcoming, right? They're saying, hey, people come here. We'll take anybody. We're reducing visa restrictions. I would do the same. Trying to think about what changes in the model. So if I make a policy more welcoming, which part of the model do you think would change?
Was it alpha 4?
That's right, my alpha 4, so that would be the weight, right? If I would want to give it importance, but it actually would be within alpha 4, it would be this political, the passport index, right? That's exactly what would change, because now if they're more welcoming, the value of it is going to be different. So I would go now, again, find what it is now. Where does Canada rank directly? So I'd open the Excel file. I found out that it was ranked at 76. So if I wanted to change it, again, I'll go to the same piece of code, uncomment the passport index, but now I'm not using Mexico, right? Now it's Canada, so I have to put the abbreviation for Canada, and maybe I will rank it at number 10. So instead of being ranked 76 most welcoming country, now it's the 10th one. So it should be much more attractive. And if I compare my estimates now, and I'm looking again at Mexico, right? I'm looking people leaving Mexico. We had 275,000 people leaving before. Now that Canada's more welcoming and is going to accept more people freely, right, from any country, we're expecting that there would be nearly 15,000 more people leaving Mexico and likely heading that direction as well, right? It's going to change the flows from these countries again. So I'm going to go now to the website. I thought we can maybe try to think, or you guys can try modeling, I mentioned Venezuela. If we change Venezuelan unemployment, for example, to 33%. So I'll open my, let's see. So, okay. I'll make this a little bigger maybe. So this is, right, this is the instruction guide. This is where I would actually go and open my page. So this is what it opens. It has all of the kind of input data. And again, I don't worry about looking at this at all. The first thing that I'm going to do, I would go up here in the top left. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. Yeah, I can. This will be easier to read for people. So in this, once you get Google Drive to open and save it for you, that you can open your own workbook, you need to leave the, whatever it's called, after the dot unchanged, but you can change the name. So I could say, for example, July 20. So I would change the name so it saves it for me. And here on the left-hand side, I don't want to worry about any of these importing things, but I'm going to click directly on this editing values. And that takes me to this piece of code that I was showing you before. Can everybody see that, right? If I click here on the left in the menu, so I open it by this orange button, see how it hides it and opens it, hides, opens, right? This one. And I'm always just go directly to my editing values. And that opens the little piece. Now they all have the pound sign. So none of this is actually being executed. The code is running with the baseline estimates that are in there for every country unchanged. Right? And if I look at on the very bottom here, where it has the line exporting data, if I click on that, it takes me all the way to the bottom. And right now it says when I execute this model, it's going to run it and save the results as just baseline immigration. So it's going to give me the amount of people who are coming into each country, baseline immigration, so the total estimate of people leaving from each country, and then the net migration. So basically the immigration minus the emigration, right? People coming in and people leaving. So kind of the net difference. So when I, let's see. Make this back a little smaller. So this is my data folder then. And you can see I ran a few today. Right, I had some baselines. I made baseline 1, 2, 3. I had the unemployment changes for Mexico. I was playing with Canada. I was playing with Syria. So every time I ran the model again and I changed the name in the code, it gave me a new set of files to look at. Does that make sense? So if I look at my baseline, for example, so these are, it's just a list of countries. So this is the emigration estimates. and you would have Albania, Argentina, Armenia, and telling you what this model's predicting the flows in that year would be, right, as far as people leaving country. I thought when we were looking at Mexico, so Luxembourg, for example, is a country with one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. It's a tiny, tiny country in Europe, but it's very rich. Nobody's leaving. Right? That's like they're at the top of our list of the income distribution, so nobody's leaving there, right? So this is what you're going to see. It's basically just a list of countries with these number estimates. So once you make a change in the code here, you can compare them, right? So if I wanted to change the unemployment for Venezuela, I would go into this editing variable values, right? And I know I want to change unemployment. So see, when I take out the pound sign, how now the line actually is in green, it shows up, right? So now if I run the estimates, it would give me new values. But this is AUS is Australia. That's what's there as an example. So I need to find out what is the code for Venezuela. So two ways, either on the GitHub page, there's a data folder, or once you actually copy the notebook to your Google Drive, you're going to have this data folder. So in my Google Drive, you are going to see Google Colab notebooks. That's going to be a new folder that's going to appear in your drive, and this GOS folder. So that's the global migration flows that you have. So if you open that one, and you can see it on the GitHub page address, you'll have to go through examples and then the multi-scale migration, and there would be the data folder. So it's all my estimates, but also the baseline values. So either you can find them in your folder in your drive now, or just looking on the GitHub. They're all in here as well. So I first need to figure out what is the abbreviation for Venezuela. So I would go into the country list, and country list Venezuela is going to be V. So at the very end, I'm going to find it. So I have Venezuela is over here, and we use the 3 digits. So it's VEN. Right? So I figured out, okay, so it's Venezuela. So I can change this now to VEN. Now the next piece, I need to figure out what is the unemployment rate. So I go back into the data folder. I find the one that has unemployment rates. Here, CIA unemployment. And this one's not alphabetical, so I'm just going to search for Venezuela. Okay, here. And this is telling me it's 10.5. So right now, the model, when it's working with the baseline estimates, it's working with 10.5. So if I wanted to now go to 33, for example, as a big one, right? I could go here and I can change this to 33%, for example. Right? Or I can make it, if right now it's 10, I can make it 20. Anything that you want to try to kind of play with, right? You can try multiple and compare values. So if I do this, then I can either sort of scroll through all of this, or just use this menu on the left and go directly all the way to the bottom. And then I would change the name here for these output values to Venezuela, so that it saves my estimates. And now I'm going to go up here to this runtime button. So this is all in the kind of step-by-step guidelines. But I would just basically tell it, okay, go ahead and run everything from the start. So it's going to start from scratch. But now, instead of taking the baseline values, it's actually going to take, okay, it's going to take the new value that I inputted for the Venezuelan unemployment, and it should give me a different estimate. So it takes a little bit to produce the graphics, but it's not, it's maybe a minute or two for it to execute, and it will give us new estimates. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you in here, when we're looking at, and I showed you some of the maps, actually, again, you can use the menu on the left. This is the piece that you can put 2 countries. So if I wanted to change which countries I want the estimate for, country 1, country 2. This one is producing an estimate for Australia and Albania, but you can change the 2 countries, put the 2 abbreviations that you want to look at, and it would give you estimates, for example. If you want to look at the costs, for example, this is the alphas that are in there right now. If you want to change them, you would change them here, right? The parameters. So each piece is giving you, as you're kind of going through this, it's identifying for you here, right? Remove the pound and change the numbers below. So all of these are, available for you to run. Let me see. And for the maps as well, if you want the map to be for a different country, this one's running for Syria, you can change this for Mexico. The same for, I added France, the same for the estimates that are in there. So let me check. Okay, so if I go down, okay, it said it completed. So I'm going to go, let's see. Hopefully it should at some point give me my estimates. Okay. Sometimes I think it's coming through now. Okay, so I'm getting net migration for Venezuela came through already. So it's just Google Drive saving a little slower. So if I open net migration, so that's people coming and going. And I will look at, for example, the net migration that was the original baseline values, and I can make a comparison. So these were my baseline values, and I'll find Venezuela. And we had 165,000 people leaving before. Now with the new estimates of higher unemployment, I have double the amount of people, right? 320,000 leaving. That's exactly what you would expect, right? We made unemployment really, really high. So economic opportunities are decreased. So I'm getting a new estimate of the flows for that country. So this is really the kind of basic structure of how you would work with this. So the Google Guide, whether it's the English version or the Spanish version, literally walks you through, okay, open the guidebook, right? It will create the new folder for you, tells you can change the name. It walks you through even Google giving you kind of access and some of the troubleshooting, how to register. Then once you have it, it says, okay, now for the first time, do this kind of run everything from the beginning, and that will save your initial set of results. But then it gives you all of the things that I showed in the presentation, how to export the data, how to name them, where to change it, now saving new things, kind of explaining the data sets, what's in there, the structure of the unemployment, the ranking, the freedom index. So it's very comprehensive. We've tested this with several groups of students, not just econ students. I was teaching a class for the policy school last semester, and I had them, never having seen this before, kind of experiment, and they really enjoyed it. They're more, studying political science and international relations. They loved kind of playing with this and modeling different situations. So between the guide that has, right, step-by-step sort of how you can change things and the explanations with the screenshots, we found it fairly easy to integrate in classes as kind of a applied assignment. I use it as an assignment. I give students scenarios and I ask them to kind of model it and figure out how to, what would change. Like if there's a conflict, if there's a war, right? What would they think? So usually for those, they will say, okay, so like freedom index is probably going to change, right? Because if there's restrictions, it's dangerous. Job opportunities are going to change. So unemployment would probably go up, right? If there is a conflict. Some of my students would suggest that they want to even make the weights different because they think now the distance is going to be more important, right? So it gives them kind of this creative ability to kind of see how things would change in the model, and determine what really is the cause and what's the consequence, and kind of thinking about how the numbers are changing. So I found it as a good experience for students. I'm happy to take questions or show you, explain more if that makes more sense. But with the kind of menus and this Google Colab interactive thing, it's really much more user-friendly, even for people who are not necessarily familiar with code. Because I can't write the code. I have no idea how that works. But I know that, if I tell it, okay, I want to edit this, or I want to edit this, right? And I'm just clicking where I want to go, how much weight, right, for the political barriers. If I want to change this, like, how do I go? If I want to compare the two countries, right, this one has the Australia, Albania, but again, if you click, I want to compare two countries, it takes me to this piece of code, and all I need to change is the country codes. It is, once you kind of play with it a little bit and see how it's done, I think it's fairly easy to use, especially for, classes that think about policy and migration. So any questions? I've done a lot of talking. Paul, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you, Eva, for giving us this workshop. Really interesting. Congratulations. I mean, this
Thank you.
Tool, this model definitely is something that is really advanced, in the sense that you're using all this technology and coding abilities in order to analyze and to predict all these topics related, for example, to society, that are very useful for us, for professors that are teaching and thinking about new ways on how, let's say, give our students all these ways to understand and discuss these things. So what I'm understanding is, specifically about this tool, is that we can make editing in several sections, right? I mean, in this interface, we can make additions on several sections, right? Not only one is specific.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, you can change multiple things at the same time, right? And that's the beauty of it. So if you want to kind of change things for multiple countries and different things, you can put all of that together in there. That's right.
Okay. And thinking about the way that you give your students the training and, let's say, the assignments, can you give us some tips? Let's say, thinking about one session is for introducing the model, and of course, reading the paper in order to understand the model. Another session would be, like, for example, doing some exercises, and then the assignment. How do you organize?
So the way, so the way I do it is, now that we actually have these kind of step-by-step guides that I've worked on with the students, I actually don't spend much time on it in class ahead of time. I tell them, okay, here is the, step-by-step guide. What I do tell them, I'm not having them read the whole paper. I don't understand, 2/3 of it. That's the computer science part.
Okay.
So I tell them to just look at the section of kind of what I covered in the presentation, just thinking about what are the costs, right? What do we put in there? The freedom index, the passport index, just really understanding kind of what data goes in it. So I just tell them, look at a piece of the paper, right, to understand. And then with this guide, I do have, the one class session that I basically sit, they sit down, but I give them their tasks. So I usually put them in groups, and I'll come up with like 8 different scenarios. So I'll have like, severe droughts are causing harvests to deplete in, like, reduce rice yields in Vietnam, for example. So now they're going to be like, okay, so Vietnam, there's going to be unemployment, right? They can't get jobs. So how do I model this, right? Or, Brexit, change in policy, right? Immigration policy in the UK, or, Venezuelan unemployment, civil unrest, right? These things. So they have to first figure out what they need to change in the models, right? So they're in groups. And then I can walk around and sort of do what I just did with you, right? As they're trying it, I can kind of help them, like, okay, how would you think about this? We go to this. But they really have had no questions. They can do this with the step-by-step. They take it one thing at a time. So I don't actually have to interfere. More what I'm answering is, you know, when I think the one good example is when I say, for example, that there was this drought in Vietnam and the students want to go in and they want to change, okay, they want to change the population because they're telling me, well, people will leave. And I'm like, but what you're modeling is the shocks, right? Your model is predicting what's going to happen to migration. And you just put what you're predicting will happen, you put it as the shock, right? So to me, I'm more there to kind of clarify what's a cause and a consequence, that they have to be careful to only model the causes and not the consequences, right? Like the only time you should be changing population is when there's literally before migration happens, if there's people disappearing. So if there is a war and people have died, then you can say, okay, now there's actually fewer people, right? But I'm just kind of there helping them think through how this would affect the parameters, but they've been very good at just kind of going through it and figuring it out. It is super user friendly, like literally just clicking on the things on the left hand side, removing the pound sign, changing the value, right? Like it's really easy at this point. The old version before Google Colab was available was a little bit more difficult for them to navigate, but now with the menu, like, I would be intimidated if I was looking at all of these lines of code. But now when I'm like, okay, I don't have to, right? I just literally like, I want to edit this. And it's the same in the Spanish version, right? I can click on this menu and it tells you, okay, where do I want to go? I want to edit the values, right? I want to look at the costs, I want to compare. So it directly takes them just to those pieces that they can really easily do that. But I think that's the best way, right? Like come up with a few scenarios like I did today and then have them kind of do the estimates, save the files, compare the numbers and talk about, do we think this is realistic? What might change, right? How are the situation changing? So I think it's, because I would be afraid, because I'm not a coder either. I can't fix this. I can't help, So if this wasn't easy, I would not be using it because computers are a black box to me that's magical. So that's why this is really beautiful in the sense that it's super kind of easy to fix. There's no big issues that are coming up and for both us as the students, right? Because if it's hard for us, we're never going to do it with the students. But they've really enjoyed the kind of the ability to, change the numbers a little bit and see how that would affect the predictions and stuff. So it's been fun for them.
Yeah, it looks really friendly. It looks really friendly for everyone, particularly for those like myself that are not
Yeah.
very computer science
Yeah, me neither.
skilled, right? One more question. For example, the delivery that your students prepare are, for example, essays, analysis, or do you give them, assignments such as to prepare a policy brief or something like that?
Yeah, so I have them usually prepare like a short presentation where they have to first say, okay, so this was our shock, and then they have to justify what they wanted to change, right? Like what are the changes that they're arguing for? Whether it's changing the unemployment rate or changing the population or the weight. So they have to tell me, okay, based on this, this is what we want to change. And then I have them present the results. So kind of show me the numbers before and after. Sometimes they choose to show the heat maps and kind of changes in the costs, for example. The tricky part with the maps is if you change unemployment from 5% to 8%, the colors are not really going to change drastically that you would see big changes, right? So it's more informative kind of on the big picture, but I have them do a kind of a small presentation. But this could be part of a bigger, right, a policy memo that you're thinking about, right? Like how could policies change? Like you could work with this in many different ways, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Eva.
You're welcome.
And I think I'm gonna try it for one of my courses, which is Global Challenges, and it's a course in which we discuss different topics that affect humanity, and
Yeah.
like for example, migration. And well, I don't know if it is allowed for everyone to use this tool.
It is open source. That's why we're doing this. Everybody can. It's, the website I gave you, and I'm happy to share the slides with Hilda as well, that she can distribute them. But the website I shared, as you said, like, you just go on it. There's no passwords, no sites, so the students can use it. And the other thing, Paul, is also that, as I said, the students really enjoy it from when they go apply for jobs, for example, and when they're not, a math major or a quantitative, that they can talk about the experience they had working with data and being able to do something. It really gives them more confidence, kind of working with stuff like this as well, which I thought was quite a benefit as well.
Thank you so much, Eva.
Of
And
course,
once
good to
again,
see you.
that's right. Nice to see you too.
Any other questions? I'm happy to. Hilda, is there a way you can distribute the slides later as well? Fantastic. Okay, Rosa?
Hi, Eva. Thank you so much for your talk. It is really interesting too, actually.
Thank you.
And yeah, in your paper, do you have like the confidence of the prediction of?
So what we did is we basically, so this is, the next steps are exciting because we, as I said, it started with some students who were really interested, and I was completely like, I don't understand coding or how this works at all. So it was, but the computer scientists needed help on sort of the model and the decision making. So we started working together, and it's been fun. I think the students really enjoy working with it. But the way it is now, it's actually just 1 year of data, right? So what we did in terms of, it's not a confidence interval. What we did is, when we calibrated all the importances and the weights, how much do we think this matters and how much do we think this matter, part of it was based on the existing literature, and part of it was actually comparing our predictions to the World Bank, what actually happened in that year, right? Now, it is and for me, I was like, but this is like one snapshot in time, right? So our next step, and we actually from Mexico that are undergraduates through a program for the summer, and they're going to actually help us work on this, where we can now change the model a little bit to focus on a specific country. Because as I said, right now, this is trying to make something on average work for everybody, right? But things that are important to Mexico or Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador are very different than for maybe countries in Africa or Southeast Asia, right? Like it's going to be a different set of parameters. So what we want to do is, instead of trying to calibrate and make the predictions fit the world, we want to try to be able to let whoever is using the model, let them choose their focus country. And then the computer would do the validation and kind of, what you're thinking about the confidence interval, right? Try to make the best predictions for that specific country. But for that, we need to build in a time component. So we want to expand kind of the baseline data. This is just one snapshot in time, right? So the next steps are that we'll kind of have it input several years of data. And then instead of trying to make it fit all countries at one time, we're going to try to make it fit the best one country over time, so that we really know what matters and what should, the flows be with one country. But that's going to take us a little bit of time. So stay tuned for that one.
Thank you. Thank
No,
you.
thank you. That's a great question. Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I'm, very much open. You guys hopefully will share my information as well, Hilda, if you can. That if people have questions or, want some tips or see the example of the assignment I give to students, for example, that's, a little bit more econ oriented, I think stuff that we looked at today, just, have them see how unemployment would matter, or, the welcoming of passports or freedoms. I think those are kind of cool. But I'm happy to answer questions over email if anybody has them. So Hopefully this was informative, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that some of you will try to use it with students. I do think they would have fun. So, but thank you so much for coming, and stay safe, everybody.